I want to present some research that we did over the last year with Nadia, where we were looking at the role of impulse buying on fast fashion consumer emotions and behaviours. And this really links into how we can understand sustainability in terms of fashion practice, because we know that there's a huge problem with young consumers buying fast fashion frequently because the prices are so cheap and because there's a lot of fashion marketing that's trying to instigate that consumption. So if we can understand what it is that makes consumers want to buy into this kind of paradigm, then perhaps we can reposition alternative means in such a way that it encourages consumers to address sustainability within their own fashion practice. And what we found so far is this emotive aspect is really important. And so we are investigating specifically what those emotions mean. So what we do know is that fashion, fast fashion as an industry, it continues to be a buoyant industry. Those who are operating within this realm are increasingly making huge profits. And although they address sustainability, it's not often in a way that really authentically addresses the issues. And despite growing discourse around fashion and sustainability, it hasn't had an impact on preventing consumers from buying into the fast fashion model. This is particularly relevant for the UK because here we buy more fast fashion than any other country in Europe. And of course, it's the global north that are increasingly impacting on sustainability through their consumption behaviours. So this makes the UK of a particular interest to understanding what attracts young consumers to want to buy into fast fashion. We do know as well that fast fashion is decreasing in pricing, decreasing significantly over the last 20 years. And this means that consumers really are buying without much care and thought of what it is they're buying. Though the fashion is so affordable that it really doesn't dampen bank accounts to keep buying fashion. And what we saw as well in the UK is that some of the prices fell to as low as 8 pence. And I'm not sure you could buy anything else in the UK for 8 pence. We're very much focused on Generation Z within this research. And the reason is because they are the consumers that fast fashion industry is mainly focusing on with their marketing tactics. But also Generation Z are interesting in that they have grown up with knowledge of sustainability and often been taught about sustainability as a concept and as a practice as young as nursery aged. And certainly a lot of the schools in the UK have gone for eco-school status. And that means that children are versed in the terminology of sustainability, such as reduce, reuse, and recycle. But also this generation are very much engaged with social media and often using that as a form of entertainment, but also using it as a means to understand what's happening within fashion, to be influenced by fashion style and trends. And it gives a platform for the fast fashion industry to market specifically to those young consumers. And through that, there are a number of tactics, such as flash sales, easy ways to pay, that stimulate hedonistic behaviours within the consumers. And because the fashion is so cheap and that once they've purchased it, they're moving on to their next consumption aspect, often fashion is discarded after limited wear. And in fact, the clothing, because there's no investment in supply chain or production management, the fashion isn't of a quality to be made more than to be worn more than 10 times. But we assume that because Generation Z are operating on social media much more, then they're absorbing much more information as well. And that will be ultimately sustainability information, which may have an impact on their behaviours. Little is known about how consumers experience post-purchase impulse consumption. So we do know that consumers are buying impulsively and frequently, but we don't know how that impacts on how they perceive that consumption later on, other than the consumption process. And so what this research investigates to do is to understand how they reflect upon those consumption experiences and how that might impact on the way that they carry out their behaviours in the future. We also know within sustainable fashion that there's an attitude behaviour gap, in that whilst consumers say that they're very concerned about sustainability, this doesn't often manifest within their behaviours. And a number of researchers have been looking at that over the last 15 years. And there are a number of barriers to buying sustainable fashion, and often style is at the fore of that. Style and price and accessibility limits consumers' engagement with sustainable fashion. So the aim of our research was to explore fast fashion consumer behaviours, emotions, and when they're buying impulse fast fashion. So that's specifically examining the role of emotion as a reflective process, how they are including their knowledge for the environment and the social impact as well, and whether or not that has an impact on their emotions and behaviours, and whether cognitive dissonance, that aspect of the attitude behaviour gap, where there's knowledge of behaviours that might not align with moral value, but it doesn't have an impact on consumption practice. Our research is interpretive because we wanted to really draw some richness within our data collection to really examine the way in which emotions played out through the consumption practice, but also in terms of reflecting upon that consumption. Having reviewed the literature, and therefore the research is inductive, because the questions emerged from understanding the ways in which consumers currently engage with fast fashion practice, but also on the ways in which they are reflecting upon sustainability as well. This led to 10 purpose-sampled in-depth interviews that lasted approximately around an hour. And we, based on the literature that was read, we wanted to focus on Generation Z women, because they are the main targets of the fast fashion marketing, but also we assumed that there might be increased knowledge and engagement with sustainability issues, having received education in the schooling system and perhaps university as well, but also because there's much more discourse on social media around the impact of sustainability. The research was gathered during the COVID pandemic, and so the interviews took place on a video platform and began with a grand tour question where they were asked to recall their recent experiences of purchasing fast fashion online and how they felt at each stage of the buying process. And we applied thematic analysis to the data. This is a brief overview of the participants that we interviewed. And you can see that they're predominantly in that age group of 19 to 24, and that they, on average, at least bought fashion a couple of times on a monthly basis. So really, we're thinking that these consumers are buying fortnightly fast fashion online. And although they didn't all consider themselves to be impulse consumers, their behaviours would suggest that perhaps they are. In terms of a brief overview of what we found, there was an aspect during lockdown where you may have assumed that people were not buying as much fast fashion because there weren't as many social activities for them to attend and to be seen in the fashion. There was still a lot of consumption happened online, and that was because of boredom, and they were looking for a hedonic dopamine rush. The fact that fast fashion marketing utilises a number of tactics to appeal to consumers also had an impact on consumption. And to an extent, they were so focused on the marketing and the offer that was being presented to them that they really forgot what they already had in their wardrobe. And so we saw this as a kind of selective amnesia. When they reflected or looked into their wardrobe and they saw that they had garments in the wardrobe that they had never worn and still had their tags on, they did feel post-consumption regret, and they often considered what that money could have gone towards. But they also illustrated that they were caught in an addictive cycle of buying more fashion due to wanting to experience hedonistic feelings, and as well because of the marketing tactics. They were also, due to the pandemic, seeking some kind of form of excitement because their lives were suspended. They had no social occasions, they weren't going to work or university and engaging with people. But fashion was an illustration of social activities, and often they bought it with a view to what they would do when the pandemic was over. And we saw as well that there was a difference in some of the participants accepting that they were responsible for the bigger sustainability agenda and that they had to address that in their consumption practice, and others who were focused solely on their consumer selves. These are the three themes that I'm going to discuss today: the pre-purchase emotions and influences, post-purchase emotions, and unethical fashion and cognitive dissonance. And those will be broken down into 4 sub-themes, 2 for post-purchase and 2 for cognitive dissonance as well. So beginning with this idea that they were bored during COVID, you can see from the quotes here that there was a lot of shopping online out of boredom and feeling a bit unsettled by the pandemic process. So the buying of fashion was considered to be like therapy in order to cheer themselves up. It also made them feel that they were achieving something that was beyond their kind of inner circle of being at home and not being in any way social. And they missed the rush, the excitement, the dopamine that they were experiencing through social occasions as well. And this kind of aligns with other literature on fashion, that buying online gives positive emotions and it breaks the monotony of the everyday. And in fact, what some of the participants reported was that they were buying more frequently to cheer themselves up, to get a dopamine rush, to feel hedonistic because their lives had been suspended so much. And this was something that they'd reflected on when they looked in their wardrobes and they saw how many clothes that they had bought over the last few years that still had their labels on. Marketing was this trigger for it. And you can see here that participant J is saying that although she's just thrown out a leather jacket because she never wore it, the fact was that she got marketing and money off a new leather jacket, and so she decided to buy it. She said that she feels that it was a bargain, and this kind of need to catch the bargain whilst it was being advertised to her superseded the reality of a jacket that would therefore just lie in our wardrobe. And so what we see here really is a loss of self-control provoked by the sale and the tactics that emerged from that. There was also this desire for the new, and this newness seemed to want to be expressed in a sense of belonging, that if they were buying what was newly in fashion, those new trends, then they belonged to the wider social networks in which they wanted to be part of. But also, because influencers are always taking images and posting them on social media of them wearing new items, they felt obliged to do the same. So they talked about the pressure to be not wearing the same thing twice. And participant E mentions in particular that she went out and she was wearing something that she'd been seen in before, and someone commented upon it, and that she was in fact mortified by this because she felt that it was detrimental on her self-presentation. And so we see here that they're starting to mimic those Instagram influences, and that fashion and being part of those new trends, in a sense, is a way to combat low self self-esteem and low confidence. It was funny how the excitement really came from the actual buying process and also the waiting for the parcel to be delivered and the excitement of having something new to wear. But you can see here that participant says here, as soon as I took it off, I forgot about it. And this is why they had so many clothes languishing within their wardrobes, still with the tags on, that they had never worn. But they saw the delivery of the fashion as being some kind of a reward and that a sense of achievement on a daily basis. Moving into post-purchase regret, we can see that the participants said that they felt good when they were buying clothes, but when they reflected upon it and realised how much money they'd spent overall, and particularly when the clothes were still in their wardrobes unworn, they saw that they could have used that money for something that was a bit more purposeful, such as an experience, and some of them mentioned as well saving to buy a house. Another participant here says, I feel regret after every fast fashion purchase. I've wasted my money on clothes that I know I don't need, and someone has suffered making these clothes just for me to shove them at the bottom of a drawer. So she's recognising that it feels wasteful, but also the bigger impact in that somebody within that supply chain may have been exploited in order to make those clothes affordable and accessible to her. So we're starting to see this post-purchase regret that Shenandoah reported coming through in our participants' discourse. Half of the participants were recognising that they had to address their sustainability in some way. And so we can see here that there are a couple of participants within this category that had stopped buying fast fashion because it was giving them anxiety when they thought about the wider impact on the environment and the people within that. And they had reorientated away from fast fashion marketing to focus on small businesses through the Etsy platform, but were mindful that because they were getting those delivered to them, there were always also impacts on their carbon footprints. And we can see that this is in line with other research as well, where young consumers are starting to think about the consequences of their own practice. But the other half said that they wouldn't change their behaviours. Despite talking about feeling angry and disgusted at how much they bought and how very little they wore, and it was still so much part of their identity, providing them with esteem and confidence, that they felt that it was too big a sacrifice to make to stop buying from fast fashion. So you can see here that participant H is saying, I know it's bad for the environment, but everyone does it. And she is, in a sense, hiding behind this social paradigm where buying is acceptable within wider society. And the idea that consumers think that their own practice is so small and insignificant that it may not have any wider impacts. But participant C is saying that if she thought about it at the time of consumption, then it might have an impact on her behaviour. But because she really likes buying clothes and because the marketing is so focused upon herself and how she'll feel and the price change and the fact that it's a bargain, then she just doesn't think about sustainability. We also see cognitive dissonance. And one of the interesting aspects of this research was that Molly May, who was a Love Island contestant and had such a big platform when she came out of Love Island, that Pretty Little Thing, a UK fast fashion retailer, wanted her to become their CEO to promote the clothing. And so they were using this influencer to sell clothing. But actually what happened was Molly May made some kind of comment about her success being because how she's hardworking. And she said that other people didn't achieve what she'd achieved in life because they weren't utilising the 24 hours in a day in the same productive way that she was utilising them. She wasn't recognising that she had a platform of privilege within that. And online, some users started to criticise her not recognising this platform and promoting Pretty Little Thing clothing so cheaply, and despite not reflecting that some people were exploited in the supply chain and only making £3 an hour. And it was because of those criticisms on social media that our participants became aware of the unsustainability of Pretty Little Thing. So actually the Instagram influencer aspect backfired and nudged our participants to think more about sustainability and supply chain management. And so to an extent, we're seeing that influencers can be used for social good by drawing consumers' attention to the bigger issues within that. So in conclusion, what we were seeing here was that the role of emotion, hedonism, self-presentation, identity, confidence, and esteem all play a strong role in instigating fast fashion consumption. And that's particularly noted through fast fashion marketing that nudges consumers and offers a sense of urgency through flash sales and limited promotional opportunities to buy fast fashion impulsively and more frequently as well. But we can also use those same tactics in such a way to bring the issues of sustainability, supply chain management, the impact on the environment, and also the impact of people on supply chain and exploitation to the attention of young consumers through those same mediums. Because there was an illustration when not caught up in the experience of marketing, of regret and reflection on those behaviours as not being the most positive way in which to spend their money. And we see that as happening through influencers as well. So there's a kind of sway of influencers of instigating consumption, but also bringing awareness to the issues. So in terms of limitations in future research, we recognise that this was a limited sample, which we've drawn upon for richness within the discussions, but perhaps the idea of hedonism, dopamine, marketing tactics can be utilised to develop a quantitative study and to reach a wider sample of participants to take part in that. But it would also be interesting to understand what the role of emotion was for consumers about participating in the fashion circular economy as well, to see how that can be utilised for marketing.